In the middle of a deadly storm, a wounded cowboy finds shelter where he least expects it, between two Apache sisters who do not believe in free compassion. What begins as a night to survive the cold turns into a journey of danger, loyalty, and restrained desire, where every decision can cost a life or change it forever. "Shut up, cowboy. You're freezing. Tonight you sleep with us," the two sisters said to Apache. Before the story even moved forward, the wind was already rushing through the Utah Territory, winter of 1877, sliding down the canyon with a cutting haste. It wasn't a noisy wind, but constant and sharp, channeled between the rock walls, dragging snow and gravel in tight spirals that struck the skin and blurred the path, making every step demand full attention. Juan had stopped keeping track of time after the second night without fire. He followed a trail, that of his own horse, stolen outside Green Creek, maybe by someone desperate or simply cruel. But the storm had erased the tracks. Now he moved purely by instinct. The terrain closed in around him, pushing him deeper into the canyon, where the wind bit harder and the cliffs rose like walls. He hadn't eaten in 2 full days. His canteen had frozen that morning. His left boot had split at the heel the day before, and he had wrapped it with cloth torn from his shirt. Every step was clumsy, heavy, every breath a calculated effort. The wound on his shoulder, clumsily stitched with fishing line, had soaked in blood again. The pain was no longer sharp, but dull, which unsettled him more than it relieved him. He had lost feeling in 3 fingers. He didn't think he would die in a place like this, but it was happening fast. Every blink made the snow seem closer, as if the trail were about to vanish. Every step required more willpower than the last. His thoughts scattered, trapped in old names and dead places. The face of a woman, a ridge where he had delivered a message of truce 2 days too late. He forced himself to push that from his mind. "Just cross the canyon," he repeated. "Reach the other side," but he didn't make it. His leg struck something uneven, rock or ice. He didn't know. His body tilted and fell. Knees first, then shoulder and chest against the hard snow. He didn't try to get up. The cold was no longer biting. It had become soft. He thought of crawling. He didn't. He closed his eyes. His hands loosened from the weapon at his side. Farina was already crouched when her sister reached her. She had seen the man from above, a dark figure against the snow, motionless, but not rigid. He had the knife in his hand, though he still hadn't touched it. His breathing was slow. She didn't like him being so close to the trail. "Why did he stop here?" Nabila asked behind her, voice tense from the climb. "He didn't stop," Farina replied. "He fell." Nabila examined the body. Rough coat, broken boot, bloodstain on the shoulder, blue lips, pale, armed, half dead. She quickly scanned the canyon. "Looks like he's alone." Neither of them trusted luck. Farina's right hand stayed under her coat. It was always slower, now burned years before when a peace talk went wrong, and instead of words, she received fire. With her left, she brushed the snow from the man's face. His skin was rough and too cold. She pressed her fingers to his neck. He was still breathing. "He won't last," Nabila said. "That shoulder is bad and worse if we leave him here." She frowned as she knelt. Her left leg dragged when she moved. A musket ball had pierced it when she was 17. It never healed properly. She looked at her sister. "Let's not argue where the wind can hear," Farina said. She was already holding the man's arm. They dragged him between the two of them. He groaned once, and nothing more. The entrance to their shelter was low, under a collapsed ledge, hidden behind seemingly worthless stones. They had reinforced the interior with thick hides and shaped the floor to drain meltwater away from the beds. It wasn't spacious, but it retained heat when the fire burned. They got him inside and closed the stone. The temperature change was immediate. It was still cold, but no longer deadly. They laid him on the central hide. The coat was stiff from ice, and Farina cut it carefully and quickly. The shoulder wound was infected. "Light the fire," she said without raising her voice. "Didn't need to." She took the flint from the clay bowl buried in the corner. Minutes later, the sparks ignited the dry moss, first branches, then the smell of burning wood. Farina removed his shirt and placed her hand on his chest. The heartbeat was slow. Do we need to warm him, or we'll lose him? Nabila hesitated uncomfortably, then decided, took off her outer skirt and threw it over the resting area. I'm not doing it for him, she murmured. No one asked you to. They gathered the blankets, thick hides over warmed stones near the fire. Farina got under the hides first, stiff from the cold. Nabila settled on the other side. The man didn't react. He doesn't smell like a soldier, Nabila whispered. Farina didn't respond. He was shivering. He'll do it for a while. We don't know who he is, Nabila said. We'll find out. Do you think he'll stay? He has nowhere to go. The three remained silent under the same blanket. The warmth returned slowly. It wasn't comfort. It was survival. If you don't want to miss our content, hit the like button and subscribe using the button below. Also, turn on the notification bell and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We appreciate your support. When morning came, the man opened his eyes and saw stone above his head. He heard the soft scrape of a knife against wood and smelled rabbit bones boiling over the fire. For the first time in days, his mind didn't wander. Juan woke without knowing where he was. The first thing he noticed was that the air didn't burn, that the cold had retreated. Not completely, but it no longer clawed at his skin. Something heavy covered his chest, hides, warmth. His fingers moved over compact, firm earth. The fire crackled softly. He turned his head slowly, and the movement pulled his left shoulder with a jolt of deep, burning pain. Fresh blood had soaked the bandage. Someone had tried to wrap him again. He opened his eyes wider. The light was dim, flickering, reflected on walls covered with tanned hides fastened against the rock. Visible seams, handmade patches. A makeshift tripod stood near the fire with a clay bowl suspended over low embers. The smell of smoke and broth filled the enclosed space. He wasn't alone. To his left, a woman sat cross-legged, a knife resting on her lap. She didn't look at him. But Juan knew she had known he was awake from the first movement. Her coat was thick, sewn from aged deer hide, lined with rabbit fur at the collar. Her black hair was tied in a tight braid. Her right hand, resting on her thigh, was badly burned. The stiff, twisted fingers barely moved. Farina. Juan didn't know her name yet, but he watched the precision of her gestures. She sharpened the knife with slow, controlled movements, not out of necessity, but mastery. To his right, another figure moved. The younger one. Her face was softer, but her eyes harder. She wore a loose tunic and a bandage around her left leg. He didn't notice the limp until he saw her stand. She leaned against the rock wall and looked at him head-on. You're not dead, she said without emotion. Juan tried to speak, but his throat burned. He made an effort to sit up. A hand pushed him back to the ground. Don't be an idiot, she said. You reopened the stitches. He took a deep breath. Just a little, he murmured. Do you remember what happened? Nabila asked. Juan shook his head once. Snow, canyon, half dead. He tried to say more, but no sound came out. He pointed to the side, his coat, his belt, his gun. Still there, Nabila replied. We didn't steal them. Then she added dryly, You're not worth much like this. Farina didn't look up, kept sharpening. Nabila brought a box close to the fire, took a wooden bowl, and filled it with broth. Eat something, you look like hell. Juan took the bowl with both trembling hands. The broth was thin, but hot. He drank slowly. Each sip hurt, but he didn't stop. Silence stretched without discomfort. After a while, Nabila sat across from him, studying him. What were you doing in the canyon? Juan's lips were cracked when he answered, following a horse. Yours? She asked. He nodded. Stolen. He nodded again. Then you're a worse tracker than you look. Juan didn't reply. Nabila leaned on one arm. Esquito? She asked. Did you kill Pache? Juan held her gaze. No, surely. I'm sure. She turned her head toward Farina. He says no. Farina raised her eyes for the first time. Her look was cold, tired of lies, but not cruel. Juan held it. Messenger. Not cavalry. He carried things, didn't shoot. Farina didn't contradict him. That was enough. Nabila stood. There are rules here. If you want to stay, you follow them. Juan frowned. I didn't ask to stay. You're still breathing, she replied. That counts. She listed without emotion. No fire at night without permission. Don't leave without telling us. No sharp things without our permission. If you go out, one of us knows. Juan looked at the stone sealing the entrance. No handle, Nabila said. Just rock against rock. You're trapped for now. Farina stood, slower, but taller. She took a folded hide and placed it near the fire. You sleep there, she said in a low voice. Juan finished the broth. His hands shook as he put down the bowl. Do you have a name? Nabila asked. In one show, don't you sound southern? Born east, walked west. Why? Juan didn't answer. Nabila watched a moment longer, then moved toward the tools. She began organizing thread, bone needles, objects that asked no questions. Juan adjusted his blanket. Pain returned in new waves. Outside, the wind struck the rock. He didn't know if he was safe or trapped, but he knew one thing for certain. They hadn't killed him, and for reasons he still didn't understand, he didn't want to leave either. By the third morning, Juan could stand on his own, not for long nor firmly but upright. The blanket fell from his shoulders as he moved toward the wall, hand on the rock for support. The shoulder wound pulled with a clean, dull pain. He looked down at the new bandage, neater than his own, tightened carefully. He didn't remember who had done it. Smoke drifted under the ceiling. The fire had burned all night. Someone had tended it silently while he slept. The heat was faint, but constant. Nabila was crouched by the hearth, scraping something in a bowl. Her hair was tied back, loose strands stuck to her cheek. An old cut marked her jaw. You can move, she said without looking at him. Just barely, Juan replied. That's more than yesterday. He let himself drop near the stone ledge, used as storage. His legs shook. Farina came in from outside with a strip of rawhide and a small bag. Snow clung to her coat. She closed the stone at the entrance and wiped her boots before crossing the space. Neither spoke. The work commanded attention. Juan watched them in silence. Farina crushed herbs and poured them into a bowl. She moved with precision. Her left hand measured, the burned right guided the edge. Nabila stirred a thick paste in a clay pot, careful not to let it burn. Juan cleared his throat. Is there anything I can do? Nabila let out a dry laugh. You walk like a newborn. I have hands, Farina insisted. She looked over her shoulder and nodded toward the back. The rabbit traps need checking. I can't run, Juan murmured. Then walk. Farina didn't wait for a reply. Outside, the air cut like a fresh blade. The snow crunched under every step, marking a slow, deliberate rhythm. The traps were low wires along an almost invisible path. Juan found two triggered, one empty, the other with a stiff rabbit. He cut the wire with his knife. His fingers were slow but obeyed. Simple tasks restored balance. On the way back, he left the rabbit by the fire without a word. Nabila raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Later, she gave him torn hides. Fix them. If you don't know how to sew, return them. Juan took the needle awkwardly at first, but the stitches came out firm, not perfect, but solid. Nabila checked his work and grunted in approval. Have you done this before? Army beds, saddles? By nightfall, Juan had brought in firewood, cleaned blades, and stacked dry moss. His body burned, but he didn't ask to stop. Farina offered warm water. You're slower than us, she said. I'm not trying to impress you. Nabila hung herbs from the ceiling and sat by the fire, covering her legs. She began shelling seeds without looking at him. Did you have a wife? Juan took a moment to answer. I left her, he said finally. Or she left you? No reply. Farina stored the remaining paste without asking. Nabila spoke again. And now what? I was looking for my horse and a warm place. You found the second. Juan exhaled slowly. You talk a lot, he said. Nabila. She gave a faint smile shrug. Only when I'm bored. Juan rested his head against the rock and closed his eyes for a moment. The air was warmer. The logs burned evenly. He hadn't been invited, nor had he earned trust, but they let him work. That was more than many places offered. That night, as he spread his blanket, no one told him to move. The fire stayed lit. No one sealed the door. and for the first time in months, Juan slept without his hand on the weapon, with the uncomfortable, silent certainty that something was starting to change. The next morning came with a pale sky and expectant silence. Juan woke before them and stepped out carefully. The canyon seemed to be holding its breath. Fresh tracks crossed the snow, too many to be animals. He returned without making a sound. Farina was already awake, sharpening a short blade. Nabila sat up when she saw his tense eyes. "Don't speak," Farina said. Juan pointed outside and drew a small circle with his fingers. Nabila took the bow and checked the arrows. Farina closed the bundle of supplies. They moved without questions, as if they had been waiting for this moment. Juan adjusted the shoulder strap, tested the pistol, and took a deep breath. They advanced through the narrow canyon crack following the shadows. The tracks became clear. 3 men, maybe 4. They had passed nearby during the night. Juan recognized the clumsy pattern of tired boots. Farina raised her hand. They hid behind an overhang. Below, muffled voices argued. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the intent. They were looking for shelter and food. Juan felt the weight of a shared decision. Nabila slipped like smoke and gained higher ground. Farina positioned herself beside her, steady. Juan stayed behind, covering the retreat. The plan was simple and dangerous. Scare them, don't confront, disappear. Then an arrow whistled and struck near a foot. A scream tore through the air. Another shot hit the ground, throwing up snow. Juan shouted from the shadows, exaggerating numbers. The men hesitated, retreated, cursed. The group fled toward the open valley. No one followed. Silence returned with a fast pulse. Nabila reappeared with a restrained smile. "It worked," she said. Farina nodded without triumph. They returned to the cave, hearts still racing. Juan set down the weapon and leaned against the wall. Adrenaline made his hands shake. Farina offered him a piece of hard bread. "Eat." As they ate, Nabila watched him from the corner of her eye. "You didn't shout your name," she said. Juan shook his head. "I never do." "Fine, names carry weight here," she replied, placing the bow near the fire. That afternoon they reinforced the entrance with stones and branches. Juan carried more than was wise, determined to prove his usefulness. Farina stopped him with a firm hand. The body takes time to match courage. When the sun fell, the cold returned with purpose. Nabila prepared a bitter infusion. Juan drank without complaint. It warmed his throat and cleared his head. Outside, the wind tested the entrance. Farina sat across from him. "Not today," she said. "Not just for us." Juan held her gaze. "I don't run from what I must." She studied him, measuring more than words. Nabila intervened lightly. "Tomorrow we'll go to the frozen river. There are better traps there." Juan agreed without hesitation. Fatigue mixed with a strange, new calm, like a well-tensioned rope. That night they shared short stories. Farina spoke of long roads and late decisions. Nabila laughed, remembering an absurd winter. Juan spoke little, but listened to everything, attentive to every gesture. When the fire went out, no one gave instructions. Juan settled to one side. The shared warmth was practical, necessary without promises. Sleep came slowly, without shocks. At dawn, the river sang under the ice. They moved carefully. Juan learned to read the marks Nabila pointed out. Farina corrected without humiliating. The work flowed with a new precision. A servant crossed in the distance. Juan tensed, then released. It wasn't the moment. Farina barely smiled. "You learn fast." He responded with a brief, respectful nod. On the way back, they found a trap full. Food for days. Nabila celebrated with a simple gesture. Juan carried the load without complaint. The shoulder hurt less, or maybe it hurt differently. The afternoon brought golden light that softened the rocks. Farina walked beside him. "Don't stay out of obligation," Juan said. He thought before answering. "I stay by choice." Nabila listened and didn't comment, only stepped a little closer. The wind moved her hair and Juan looked away, conscious. Not everything valuable needs a name. When they closed the entrance, the shelter felt smaller and safer. The fire lit on the first try. Outside, the world remained harsh. Inside, something was beginning to take shape. The fifth day began with a distant roar that made the stone vibrate. Juan woke, hand searching instinctively. Farina was already standing, listening. Nabila knelt and pressed her ear to the frozen ground. It wasn't thunder. It was dynamite, distant but clear. Someone was working the mountain. Juan frowned. Miners or bounty hunters, he said. Farina adjusted her coat. In either case, better to move. They prepared light packs, nothing extra. Nabila covered tracks with pine branches. Juan put out the fire and scattered the ashes. The shelter would sleep, but not die. They left before full dawn. The new trail skirted a narrow ledge. The wind pushed with bad intent. Juan walked first, setting the pace. Farina closed the march. Nabila moved between them, silent, confident. Midway, they found an abandoned camp. Leftover food, opened cans, fresh tracks. Juan leaned in to observe. 3 men, one limping. Farina looked. Still at the river. Not us. They descended into a dense forest where the snow was shallower. The air smelled of resin. Nabila pointed to high marks on the trees. Moose, big food, Juan said. He understood the risk, also the opportunity. They hunted with patience. Juan distracted, Farina guided. Nabila released the precise arrow. The animal fell without drama. They worked quickly, meat, hide, tendons. Nothing wasted. The cooperation was clean, almost elegant. While carrying, Juan slipped and fell to his knees. The shoulder flared with fire. Farina was at his side immediately. "Don't be foolish," she said. Nabila handed him a strip of leather for a better adjustment. They moved to a protected clearing. They built a low, discreet fire while smoking meat. Silence became comfortable. Nabila sang softly, a brief melody that calmed the pulse of the place. Juan listened without interrupting. Farina carved a steak, focused. When the song ended, no one spoke. It wasn't necessary. The crackling was enough. The day passed unhurriedly, as if the world granted a truce. In the afternoon, they saw smoke to the west, far off, but steady. Juan suggested flanking along the dry creek. Farina agreed. Nabila took height to watch. The movement was already a learned choreography. Crossing the creek, a shot rang out, kicking up dust. They dropped to the ground. It wasn't aimed at them, but they were close. Farina decided to wait. "Patience is also a weapon," she murmured. The unknown group passed without seeing them. Laughter, boots, haste. When they left, Nabila exhaled. Juan noticed her hand tremble. He barely offered water. She accepted with a frank look. They continued to a smaller, dry, hidden cave. They would spend the night there. Juan reinforced the entrance with brush. Farina inspected exits. Nabila prepared an ointment and applied it to his shoulder. Her fingers were firm, careful. Juan held his breath, not from pain. Farina watched without comment. The gesture wasn't intimate, but it seemed so. The silence grew denser, charged with intention. They ate hot meat. Juan thanked her quietly. Nabila responded with a nod. Farina spoke then. "Tomorrow we cross the high pass. After that, each decides." Juan nodded, accepting the truth. That night the cold returned forcefully. They shared blankets out of necessity. Juan lay between them, stiff at first. Nabila settled without drama. Farina closed her eyes, confident. The wind struck the rock. Juan felt the nearby warmth. Human, he thought of paths, debts, choices. He didn't move, neither did they. The rest was deep, earned. At dawn, the pass revealed itself, cruel and beautiful. Bluish snow, clear sky. They moved slowly. Juan marked the tracks. Farina kept the pace. Nabila observed signs invisible to others. At the summit, the world opened. Valleys, rivers, distant smoke. Farina stopped. "Here we separate," she said without harshness. Juan looked at Nabila, then at her. Not yet. Nabila barely smiled. Farina considered. She agreed. "Then we descend together," he replied. The future wasn't written, but the path was, and for now it stayed the same. The descent was slow and demanding. The snow gave way under their steps, and the air thinned. Juan led carefully. Farina marked exact pauses. Nabila watched the horizon, reading subtle changes in the wind. By midday, they reached a low forest. The cold eased. They found a stream free of ice and drank. Juan washed his face and felt relief. Farina inspected fresh tracks and decided to head south. The trail led them to an old line of abandoned wagons. Broken wheels, torn canvas, a shattered mirror. Nabila picked up a brass button. Someone had passed in haste and fear, Juan said, checking a trunk marked with a knife. Recent rough symbols, they weren't hunters, Farina frowned. Some men can't leave without leaving noise. Better to go around through the brush. They entered thick terrain. Thorns and branches blocked the way. Juan protected her. She looked at him surprised and kept moving without saying a word. A distant shot echoed among the hills, not close, but clear. Farina stopped their advance. They waited, motionless. The sound faded. They continued, changing course discreetly. At dusk, they found a hunter's cabin half buried in snow. Sturdy roof, crooked door. Juan cleaned the interior. Farina repaired the latch. Nabila lit a small fire. The cabin smelled of old wood. The heat rose quickly. Juan sat to bandage his shoulder. Nabila came over and adjusted the knot without touching more skin than necessary. Thanks, he said. She nodded. They ate in silence. Outside, the forest creaked. Farina spoke at last. Tomorrow there will be men crossing the valley. If we stick together, we must decide how to pass. Juan pictured the place in his mind. He suggested crossing the dry gorge, risky but hidden. Nabila approved. Farina considered and accepted. The decision was made without words. Rest came with honest fatigue. During the night, a noise woke Juan. Soft steps. He took his weapon, breathed. Nabila was awake, listening. Farina, too. An animal passed. The danger left without touching the door. At dawn, the sky promised a storm. They left early. The gorge demanded balance. Juan moved first, testing rocks. Farina held an improvised rope. Nabila crossed with confident grace. In a narrow spot, a stone gave way. Juan slipped and hung. Farina tightened the rope with surprising strength. Nabila leapt and grabbed his arm. They emerged, trembling, alive. The scare left nervous laughter. Juan thanked her quietly. Farina responded firmly, "No one falls alone here." They continued with more caution, respect growing silently. At the gorge exit, they saw the open valley, smoke in thin columns, temporary camps. Nabila pointed out escape routes. Juan memorized them. Farina chose to move at dusk. They waited, hidden. Time stretched. Juan shared a canteen. Nabila drank and returned it without looking. Farina closed her eyes for a moment, as if entrusting the world with a truce. In darkness, they crossed the valley, counted steps, measured breaths. A nearby voice made them stop. They crept through the brush. Juan's heart pounded strong and steady. On the other side, the forest swallowed them. They only stopped when silence returned. Nabila smiled wide, free. Farina allowed a long exhale. Juan felt shared pride. They found a protected clearing for the night. The fire was minimal. Farina assigned watch shifts. Juan took the first watch, looked at the stars, and thought of staying. Nabila sat beside him, asking nothing. They shared the cold and the view. Juan spoke slowly. "I'm not trying to save anyone, just walk well." She responded with a calm look. Farina watched from the shadows, silent. The balance was fragile and true. The night passed without incident, holding promises unspoken. At dawn, the path opened towards safer lands. Farina announced a nearby stop with supplies. Nabila adjusted her bow. Juan checked the tracks. They stayed together by choice. Before leaving, Juan touched the earth and gave thanks silently. Farina saw him and nodded. Nabila moved first. The day greeted them with cold light and a possible future. The last day began with a clear, almost solemn dawn. The cold persisted, but it no longer bit the same. Juan moved forward with steady steps. Farina set a course toward a sheltered hollow. Nabila walked ahead, confident. Upon arrival, they found remains of an old abandoned trading post. Fallen walls, an intact clay oven, enough shelter. Farina examined the place with a critical eye. "We can stop here, at least for a while." Juan helped clean the interior, removing debris, reinforcing a beam. Nabila quickly lit a fire. The space transformed. It wasn't home, but it could be. The silence felt different, less tense. As the fire grew, Farina brought out the final provisions. Nothing would be left over. Juan offered to fetch water. Nabila went with him. They walked together to the stream, alert but relaxed for the first time. The water ran clear. Juan filled the canteen. Nabila knelt and touched the icy surface, saying something brief about the place, about staying. Juan listened without interrupting. She made no promises. On their return, Farina watched them arrive together. She asked nothing, only assigned tasks. The afternoon passed with simple work. They repaired the oven, hung hides, secured a discreet entrance. As night fell, they cooked the last of the smoked meat, eating slowly. The fatigue was different, deep and satisfying. Outside, the wind passed without trying to enter. The shelter held. Farina spoke clearly. "I will continue south when the weather allows. I have unfinished business." She looked at Juan. "You decide here." Then she looked at Nabila. "You too." Nabila held her gaze. "I've walked far. I want to choose the place." Juan felt the weight of those words. They were neither invitation nor farewell. They were truth. That night they slept without watches. The world seemed to grant them peace. Juan woke before dawn, stepped outside and breathed the cold air. He looked at the horizon without hurry. Farina joined him. "You've changed," Juan said. She didn't deny it. She nodded. "The path teaches, and you listen." They shook hands briefly and firmly as equals. Nabila appeared with blankets. "The day comes clear," she said, smiling at Juan. There was no shyness, no urgency, just a shared calm that demanded care. They spent the day exploring the surroundings. Fertile land, a nearby house, hidden paths, possibilities. Juan built a small corral. Farina helped and corrected without imposing. At sunset, Farina prepared her gear. She would leave at dawn. Nabila hugged her long. Juan bowed his head. There was no sadness. Farewells do not always hurt. That night the fire burned larger. They spoke of past stories and future paths. Farina laughed heartily. Nabila listened attentively. Juan stored every gesture in memory. Before sleeping, Farina spoke once more. "Take care. Not out of fear, but out of respect," Juan answered sincerely. "Thank you for not letting me die." She smiled without softness. Dawn brought the farewell. Farina left without looking back. Juan and Nabila watched until she disappeared. The silence remained full, not empty. The following days were simple: work, food, brief laughter. Juan learned to stay. Nabila learned to trust. The romance went unspoken. It was built through small actions. One afternoon, Juan fixed the fence when Nabila approached. She touched his arm. "Here is fine," Juan said. She nodded. "Yes, here." Winter continued, but it no longer ruled. The shelter became home. Two paths had crossed and decided not to separate yet. There were no oaths, no laws, only daily choice. And in those harsh lands, that was the most honest form of love. When the final night of the story fell, the fire burned steady. Outside, the world remained wild. Inside, Juan and Nabila shared silence, warmth, and an open future. And so, where the cold almost killed them, they found something stronger. Not because they sought it, but because they stayed long enough to recognize it.